uncontainable trepidation distressing Pacific Ocean instead of their apparent stomping waters of observable choice in the great Mediterranean. This sailor, how is it that dreams do feature that form of peculiar distressing presence that's chief elements in dialogue is oft more recallable over top of narrative and setting. His words reworked when a captain declared, "No, she's a concerted attack. We're blinded to overhead and beneath. Look at the Russian flags. There's the Chinese, the Turks, the Confederate Gog and Magog forces assembling overhead in addition to NASA." Surely they knew, 'twas but a dream at the mention of NASA. We all watched on as his corpse was floated out to sea, dignifying his life and custom that had scarcely for others met with reciprocated gesture of consideration and good honor. "Look," continued the sailor. "There's the sound as suspected. Scarcely angels but a terrific pincer movement only on the Pacific, those are submarines in and 4 of them in their dream did submerge. Only having the Turkish and Russian and Chinese emblems emblazoned against the machinery as composite embedded in mosaic form in that emblem representing the Arab Confederate flags. The 4 colors hosting at forefront as colors of the 4 horsemen. As said, that was framed by NASA's sickle sets crossing at 15-degree angles over top like golden razor-tip rods as hoods, and in the forefront of the entire composite was a world globe through which was encaged these 4 colors. The red, white, black and pale green. Such was on the first submarine to break the plane of ocean surface. Behind it sub number 2 spit through its whale hole before the 3rd and 4th punched on through. Sailors scurried for their guns as the ship's guns trained on each submarine, however was she greatly shook when the 5th beast blasted on through. Storming into the sizable Frederick McCann and its seamen as a mini-earthquake occurred when she shook only minutes later after pummeling and shutting propellers down. Look, the one slamming up on us destroyed. Holes punched into her on every side and that's what was causing the wicked broil overtaking us, and she's one of ours. Now they're poised to unload on us. Don't wait for the command. Unload on all 4, who knows what's on their trail. And to this a senior officer had a mind to overrule. No, radio. Get M on radio. Let's see if we can get a word from them. Again, a strange dream, if only it weren't a forward glimpse of, again, just to get there when we get there. The grey toward black day enveloped by London-esque fog lit up with yellow and reddish-orange fire and phosphorescent white with blue airborne synapse spidery claws streaking maddeningly about. Lighting up the loose framery to the blitzkrieg and trade-off with cries of agony sopped up like the sponge that was the unrelenting shelling, with an invisible hand seeming to use her to scour all of metallic and steel to her strip color that resembled shipyard's earliest touch of primary varnish and rust-resistant coating. The news most difficult to encounter especially were, 'twas one's own self who served as both antagonist and protagonist, who had the blood on the hands some time before Judah Maccabees had the ample incriminating stain on his own. In both instances the cameras were scarcely rolling. The luxuriant bliss of midnight blue boasted of its prominence at both the scene of the crime and the location of the vanishing act. The only cloud in the earthen apprehendable stratosphere had like leaves afloat shaken from an oak tree fallen to earth. The fog impenetrable summoning the war-torn elements tinging a bleeding prismatic color arresting inside like a scarlet tear, post-twilight and somewhat muted only where screaming autumn could divest itself of nature's subdued intimation. What to make of this premature and uncommon snowfall in Jerusalem? The beautiful prisoner and damaged goods worn as a luck charm that's also known as was ignominious curse. One of several notable characters dotting the terrain of our tale, hither and forthwith to name her as co-antagonist, without whom would our Joel Weber fabric provide for us the stitching centering the hemming delineating the moral and unshorn richness of story we're involving her. Lost in the profuse darkness that was her hooded veil and resembling a character herself from one yarn of antique timelessness bottled up for keepsake of the classic volumes sought when the femme fatale despaired of hope and life itself. The graceful depiction presenting to mind the lurid tale of the woman resigned to her any interpretation of fate, sketched as the story's protagonist who'd with hands cupping at lagoon water slowly climbed out. Ascended with her slowly disappearing thighs and blossoming gown floating around her. Moseying into the brackish water ahead of her. Her eyes once gleaming with silvery moonlight ambience and ceiling and then closed and appearing to dialogue with a serenity that was scarcely ever before personally experienced. What was in front of her mattered only in direct proportion with what mattered in her past. What arrested here in our real-life version of her, or should have. She faced forward while wearing as might a charm wear the front of her evening gown with elegance and composure, only what could personify or embody what was unto her one cataclysmic end to justify the intention in the full composite volition, speaking good tidings to her any beginnings, if maintaining dignity was the reasonable demand. 'Twas a contradiction. You detestable harlot, Jezebel, you. To her enchanting haunt Judah Maccabees taunted, slowly with rounded shoulders hunkering down and backpedaling with the Mount of Olives to his left side. Appearing with that right hand to be with rolling hand, collapsing and reviving fingers a roll reeling her in and directly to him. Before you planted my cousin's identifying information at the foot of the site, do tell me how many children you murdered by overseeing the launching of the rocket. Ordered to face his charges and eventual death via hanging then. Here you are in silk robe with face-obscuring hood, and I hereby declare that the same is your burial cloth and shroud. Mark my words, as today you perish. If Joel were here, he would invariably at the sight of her once again make parallel mention of one of his Russian novels from his classics catalogue. Judah registered the thought. Surely he shall find lendable as most fitting description the femme elegant and distressed damsel Anna Karenina from the novel of the same name by Leo Tolstoy. Instead of the luring waters to snuff out her despair or the freight train to smite the candle wick of her life and non-legacy, here encroaches the epitome of the anti-Semite on design that unwittingly he did wine and dine. Approaching me in the fashion of a lady who is intoxicated by the drunken allure of her pestering antagonism that won't let her alone, the festering conscience, if a tall inherent in a soul with blood of Mossad and some 200 children and adolescents on her hands. Like the sumo wrestler he straddle-stepped and rolled with those fingers, by gesture baiting and commanding her. Come on. Step into your natural otherworldly conclusion and unfabled end. Judah seemed to say. What he did say was, you've seen it, yes. Perfecting the qualifying tone quite masterfully of the villainous nemesis lead role, against odds, admittedly, but your master is stop of a wicked Persian Gulf percolating simmer floated out by US ops in a pinewood box. Your master, or your mister. You catch the glimpse of that, Mrs. Hussein, dead and long cold by now. To which she muttered, he is he? And as a three-armed man instead of, one. I might have been the first to know. Yet ahead, Zionist criminal. Yet ahead. Judith mentioned pithily, unlike him I retain my soul. And, he added, something you wish to disclose yet. H.M. The sedative ordering her mechanical step strangely set her loose only after Judah took to the ground, appearing like he might with one boot firm against Kidron Brook earth at once launch into the swan dive or from the end of the foot of the arching skyward pointing ski ramp lift. Stilling her as he for the first time removed her from his forefront vision. Gazing still and toward the ground directly in front of him as though in steeped meditation, only the crown of his helmeted head facing her. He angled his arm outward with extended finger at the end of crooked wrist. Groundward pointing as though half pinned to the cross, scarcely noticeable that that other arm wasn't there to steady him. Then his friends arrived, ravenously livid, as seemed, and with all pedaling fours like fanbelts speeding away from anchoring supports. Hearing his shrilling screams alarming her until the vicious growling sounds of the guttural snarling and harrowingly cacophonous watery choking of the canines bred to dismantle and dismember terrified her from behind. One hound and then another tearing at her garment before in unison ripping at her flesh. Screams silenced as dripping blood turned to gushing, her defensive stance while still on her feet a posture of panicky desperation before the woman slammed to the ground. Just maybe unluckily for her right arm seeming to serve as padding for her crown of head. An arm that was ripped away from ligament, bone and tendon as Judah who'd lost his appendage to warfare couldn't help but to take a special notice. Two salivating hounds disappeared with the arm bridging between them as dogs doss-e-do and clumsily like broken machinery sideways step and readjust before both turned to feasting on their own portion. Four other hounds squarely swept on in behind these beasts and, in a vicious snarling fight to solely win the body, these dogs engaged in horrid tug-o-war cluelessly with the woman prized gracelessly in a backwards retreat that was answerable only to impelled momentum and wobbly vertigo. When they disappeared over the gully there swallowed them and this woman and wife of the oil mogul Mrs. Amani Hall. How she lived is how she dies. Judah, without concealing his gleaming eye and delight, slowly traipsed on over to the very area where he once with boot prepared to hammer descend on his neck with the man grass impressions from the body of Nasser Abu Matter Hussein still evidencing where he once lay before his vanishing that evening. Judah retrieved the goblet from around her neck and the bloodied earth, held it in the air against the moonlight that was suddenly alive with the lightest dustings of snow flurries, and, turning toward the ravine and in eerie fashion stepping away from the sight of the last few breaths, as twir of the mauling, Judah let scream his decibel climbing quiet defying whistle. Sailing it on the wind as the dogs returned to their master, each with bloody ugly moustache and flashing eyes in a horrid depiction of delayed justice that had finally delivering the goods. Judah through the impossible fog walked away, seeking higher elevation only while experienced the throes of an inarticulable despair, depressed with fatigue and some inexplicable cogitation overtaking him like a bandit. He muttered, the birthday present without the candles only he isn't present. If against odds USA doesn't sweep on in to save him, yeah, as though adding a caveat phrase with articulating what he in mid-stride inserted, the fiery glow from the Temple Mount area and the corner of the temple itself catching his gloomy features and seeming to exaggerate his sluggish approach, almost seeming to be walking in reverse, matter of fact today is the day. Minutes instead of hours unless he gets a surprise of a sort only while standing on those gallows. And a nasty snarl overtook him as though borrowed from the mauling canines when he'd with menace mouthed something about a wretched Jezebel before making off like a dot, disappearing into the mirroring glimmer of Jerusalem's main attraction only after traipsing on past the impaled east gate, still smoking in fires of wind-wafted condensation, really, with those the ICBM missile shells appearing like abandoned oversized cigars there. He's fought the good fight and has encouraged me to do the same. You know what they say. Blood truly is thicker than water. And for a reason unknown to him, while moseying by Judah listlessly pointed without expressly looking at these diffused threats and kept on weighty-legged procession. God receive his soul. Swallowed up by the profuse dark in the sky of shifting lights and still visible day street. The rule was found in the product of sentiments and things learned pertaining to his Jewish tradition and things that could be traced to scriptural intimation. Lex Fold from St. Patrick
Listening to
Israel's earth
70
terra
by Eli
firma.
James, all rights are reserved.
Stepping atop the
2023.
platform with 5 other